going to help us formulate a plan for going forward. Okay. So what you can see here, a list of phases that we believe that we're going to need to go through to get from where we are now to where we need to be, which is back to national competition. So you can see that in March, the clubs closed. At the moment now we have the clubs that are open. When we say open, that just means that the doors are open. It doesn't mean that people are ready to play. They might be doing solo practice, or they might be doing some household groups, but at least we've now got squash courts opening up around the country, which is a start to us getting back to a national level of competition. But, it's a very long path to getting back to national competition, and we feel that we're likely to be going through a different geographical reaches of play, probably going from club play through to district play, maybe state play, regional or sectional, and then through to national. So that's a long path, I think you'll all agree. And tonight we're going to look at what we can do during those stages to give our players some meaningful play to get us back to a national level of competition. I don't know whether all of you have looked at our website and know that we do have and have been helping along the way our pros and our facility owners in their return to play. So we are looking at all the guidelines, whether they're from the CDC or from the local authority, the county, the state, and federal, and trying to get them back to a place where they can legally and safely return to play. And if you go to our website, I just want to show you so that you know, and you can look at this later. If you look at our website, you can see up here there's a banner, which is our COVID site. And particularly, you might find interesting some of the information we have under facility resources, where we have a roadmap where we guide our club owners back to full club play, usually through solo practice first, as I said, gradually increasing the number of players that you can play with to eventually getting to a full suite of club programming. And I think most of you on this call tonight are in states where you're in some part of that process. I think the only places that are closed right now are on the West Coast. But we've also got here, for your interest as well, we have some player resources. So if you click on here, you'll see these are the guidelines for what you can expect when you walk into a club, what you should be doing before you get into the club, what you could be doing when on court, through to making sure that you leave and that all the safety and sanitization protocols are adhered to when you play. If you are in that solo practice session, then we've also given you here some options for some solos that you might want to do. So feel free to just go through this and see if there's anything here that is of interest to you as you start to play again. What we also have done is compile a list of all the states, where those states are in their current opening process, and what it is that they are allowed to do during this time. So not everyone is allowed to do exactly the same thing. And over here, if you're interested, is where we believe the guidelines are that should be being adhered to in the different parts of the country. So for New York, for instance, there's a statewide guideline for return to sports. Mostly it's a return to sports, sometimes it's with gyms. So again, if you're interested in any of this information, just feel free to go to the website and have a browse. If you are also involved in any facilities and you're involved in the opening process, then, and you have any questions, please feel free to just reach out to me directly and we can talk about it. So on the return to competition, how are we going to go around coming up with our plan of action? And I think you've all seen the survey that we sent around about a month ago. The survey asked about your likelihood to travel around the country and what your major concerns were. Like, would you go play in a national tournament? Would you play locally or regionally? So we have an understanding of how the different parts of the country were feeling back in June. Of course, that can change, but we have an idea that I think many people are very happy to play locally. And then as you extend that geographical reach, and it's a little more uncertain. Health and safety risks seem to be a lot more concerning at that point. So we want to understand from all our families like what it is that's concerning them right now, and that's part of the session tonight. We've also been talking to our teaching pros. They're crucial to our return to play. They're the ones who will help facilitate that in both teaching, and actually hosting tournaments too. So we're talking to families across the country. I think you'll agree that it's very different on the Northeast than it is in the Central States and on the West Coast too. So we really do need to understand what are those differences so that we can try and put together a plan that caters for that and is flexible. We've also formed a medical advisory group that consists of people who are doctors, who are orthopedic surgeons, through to people working literally on the vaccine. So we have a really good source there of advice for this particular situation for working out what is safe, and also not only safe from the COVID point of view, but many people haven't played for a few months, and we want to make sure that you come back and you remain injury free. Once we've collated all this information, we're going to, Harry and I are going to put our heads together and try and work out a plan of action, which we will then come back to you guys and say, this is what we've come up with. What do you think? How do we tweak this? What could be better? We need to make sure that we also go through the board and our junior squash advisory panel. We just want to make sure that everybody understands what it is we're trying to achieve, and that we bring people along the journey with us. And finally, we'll have board approval to go ahead with whatever the plan is that we've all had part of. So the purpose of tonight really is to throw it over to you in a minute and understand what it is that's concerning you on the Northeast. As I said, everywhere is different, but the Northeast has a lot of players in a smaller geographical area than the rest of the country, contains by far the most players. And so it's very important that we listen to what it is that you have to say. In terms of the way that the virus is as well, we need to be cognizant of just how big this country is and how everybody is dealing with the virus at any particular point in time. So the West Coast is not doing very well right now in terms of COVID. It's also very far away. Central region has lots of pockets of activity that are very far away from each other. I would say that the East Coast is probably doing the best right now in terms of controlling the virus, but we do know that winter is coming. We're all going to go inside, and maybe that's going to change. So again, anything we need to put together needs to be flexible and adaptable to the situation that we're going to find ourselves in. So what I just want to make sure that everyone is thinking about as we think about how we're going to go about creating a plan of action is it's not just tournaments that we can play on a squash court. And I know that at the moment, tournaments are how you gain rankings, and it's a very crucial part of what we do. And that still remains the same. But I think as we go on the journey from clubs open to national competition, there could be a place for friendly matches, for box leagues, ladders, and as well as tournaments that don't have to be age grouped as well. So I think when we're looking at this, let's see if there is a place for any of these other types of organized play that will help keep our kids engaged and us engaged in squash. So ultimately what we're trying to do is to try to find a meaningful play for all levels of player, not just the JCT player, but for even a new player or a bronze level player, but make it meaningful for them at each stage of the process. Again, as we go from that clubs open all the way through the geographical areas to eventually we'll get back to national competition. I think when I'm thinking about this, I feel like tournaments are probably last on the list of things to get going. As I'm looking at how these things are progressing, I feel like the first stage is more, let's go and play one match and leave. Let's start slowly. And what is the way that we can do that? To just go to the club, play your match, have a good game, make it competitive, and then go home. Tournaments, you're going to have more than one match. You're going to be around for a little bit longer. So I do want to try and think about how we can use everything that we have to help us through this process. But I think at the same time, we have to make sure that we understand and we take into account the very real concerns that are around travel. Many people won't want to get on a plane. They want to drive and come back home, don't want to stay in a hotel. Many of the states right now are quarantining visitors from outside the East Coast. I'm sitting here in Connecticut, and I think it's like 36 states right now have to quarantine when they come into the state. So whatever we put together needs to be cognizant of that type of restriction. At the same time, that kind of leads into, do we want to have events that are closed to residents of that particular area, or do we want to continue to make them open to anybody who's coming in? Do we have a hybrid of that? But those are options that we have as we think about what it is that we're going to put together. Operating protocols. This means if we're going to run a tournament, what is it that we need to have in place to make it as safe as possible? What do I mean by that? I mean, how much do we have to reduce occupancy? Do we just let the players in, or do we allow a coach in, or do we allow a parent in, or do we allow one of those in? What's the role of masks here? Do we have the masks on court? We definitely have them off court. Spectators who are allowed in are definitely going to need to wear masks. What are the sanitization protocols we're going to need to have in place, and how do we do that in a tournament setting? So how do we make sure people play, they leave, and we clean the courts? What are the ventilation requirements going to be for a facility, for a tournament that we're going to sanction? As we go indoors, that the ventilation is very important. The airflow and air exchange is very important to mitigate the risks of the virus spreading. Also, the duration of the tournament. Do we want to do a lot of smaller tournaments so that you can go play and leave on the same day? And how would we do that? So these are some of the things that we're working through right now. We're putting together some draft protocols for people, and we can review those next time we meet. And the other thing we need to make sure is that, as I've said, the virus is controlled in some areas and not in others, and that's going to change unless we have a vaccine, or then we need to have a system that is adaptable, flexible, and caters for that. So that in the moment, the Northeast is good. If we started something here, that's great, but we can't start something in California right now. And that could definitely change in the next few months. It could be completely the opposite. So is there a system that we can put in place which gives people an opportunity to play, a meaningful play when they can, when it's safe to do so, but doesn't penalize some areas if they are not allowed to do that? It's not their fault if they're not able to open safely. So is there a system that we can put in place in the interim that allows for that? So what I want to do now, I'm going to push this over to Harry, and Harry's going to talk a little bit about tournaments and rankings, perhaps regions. They're all very interrelated. He's going to talk about what are the options that are open to us, or some of the options that are open to us. We're going to throw that over to you to see what comments you have, what questions you have. If you've missed anything out, then we definitely need you to let us know, and we'll try to address your questions. We also want to talk about, at some point this evening, about the rotational play and non-ranking play. Not everything has to be competitive, not everything has to count. So is there something that we can put together that you feel will be meaningful and useful that is not a competitive event? I understand college squash is obviously of concern to some of you. And some of you filled out the form and asked a few questions around that and the college recruitment process. And Dan will be answering questions related to college squash. And many of you play high school squash or middle school squash too, and you may have concerns surrounding that. And this list is not exhaustive at all. If you have other issues and other questions, please encourage you to put them on the chat, and then we'll get around to answering all of them. But first, I'd like to invite Harry to talk a little bit about our thoughts around the tournaments, rankings, and perhaps the role of divisional play. And many of you have questions on that you've posed on the form. If he doesn't address them, then we'll make sure that, again, you put them on the chat, and we will get them answered for you. So over to you, Harry.
All right, thanks, Kim, and thanks all for joining. It looks like we have about 113, 14 on the call right now, and it's great seeing some of these names pop up, as we haven't really had the opportunity to see any of you in person over the past few months. So it's nice to see some friendly names out there. And then to
I don't know if I'm alone, but I can't hear Harry, and that might be me. Am I alone?
Is that better?
Yep.
Can people hear me now?
We've got you. We've got you, Harry.
It's me.
Having those
Don't
dreaded
take it
headphone
personally.
issues, I guess. But apologies. And just to quickly touch on Kim's point about engaging and asking for feedback. The request would be because we have so many people on the call right now, everyone is muted, and we're just going to ask that any questions you do have or follow-up questions, either email us directly or you can use the chat feature through Zoom, and Dent will grab all those and pose them to the group. But to get to the point about tournaments, obviously it's front of mind for most, if not all. Kim and I speak with parents, coaches, and pros almost on a daily basis since March 12th, when we initially needed to pull the plug on the remainder of the season. And generally the first question that comes up is tournaments. When are they going to start up again? How are they going to start up again? What are we going to be doing with rankings? So I just quickly wanted to touch on some of the, I guess, the overall gold, silver, bronze JCT structure, and why we have that all the way as the quote unquote end goal in this chart in US Squash Phase 4 for the restart to play. And it just has to do with the large interconnected nature of the structure that we have built. Obviously, there's tournaments that occur in all regions around the country. Some regions, such as the East Coast, have many more than other regions, like the West Coast and the Midwest. But that being said, all of these tournaments is about 200 each year, and they're all interconnected. They're all based on the premise that they're open to players from all around the country. And in the current situation, each state is effectively managing the situation in their own way. And therefore, many states will effectively be locked down or have travel restrictions or quarantine requirements upon return when traveling outside of their state, which makes this national tournament system all the more difficult to restart. So although that's the end goal, we want you all to be able to get back on court. We want to get back on court ourselves and resume playing the sport that means so much to all of us, and be able to provide your children with the opportunities to continue playing, to develop, and receive their rankings, potentially move on to college and beyond playing squash. We need to prioritize the safety and make sure that following the necessary protocol moving forward. So the way we've been thinking about it, and where we'd like to engage all the families, all of you.
Harry, I'm going to interrupt quickly. Can I just ask you to throw your headphones back in? It was a lot better at first. Don't take it personally that Kim wasn't listening to you at the end.
No, it's fine. Is that better?
Not quite.
I just need to fix my hardware, I guess, at some point. I'm trying to think of where I was. So US Squash, we're thinking about this and want to engage everyone on this call in terms of thinking about how to bridge the gap between where we are now, so effectively clubs open, to moving towards through each phase into the return to national play. So keeping in mind, in the initial phases, it is when clubs open, they're effectively one person on court. You're playing within your households. Many clubs have restrictions on the number of guests that you can bring in. So effectively, your squash circle is very small. And as the quote unquote situation improves in your area, and your clubs establish their protocols and establish a level of comfort, making sure that they can guarantee, or to the extent possible, a safe environment for players to participate, slowly increasing the circle of players that you can compete against, which includes a growing geography. So maybe we start with the club within your own family, and then we move into the club amongst other members, and then we can move into district or the city or the state, multiple clubs within that area. And then again, going to the regions, and then we're back at the national system. So in a lot of phone calls and conversations, there does seem to be a mindset that it's a binary process, and it's just we're in a state of no tournaments, and that one day we'll just be in a state of we're back to playing tournaments. And again, we definitely want to get there as an organization, as a community. But I think it's going to be a little bit more of an organic process where you do start, and from the competition standpoint, as Kim was mentioning in the last slide, that there are a lot of outlets. So it's how can we help facilitate competition or just fun play in a way that's meaningful to all of you. So again, so starting with maybe just your own club, maybe it's a ladder, maybe it's a box league, maybe it's a league. Once we open up a little bit past just a club, interclub match play, again, ladder, box league, leagues. One of the factors that we'd probably, or metrics that we'd be looking to use to help facilitate this competition is the player rating, which is a great way of pairing players of similar ability to make sure that it's meaningful for all sides, so that you're helping to identify the players that would provide the most opportunity for development, for training. It does seem like I mean, everyone's getting a little bit restless as we're rolling into month 4 or so, or 5 of this, and we just want to get back on court. We want to get back into competition shape, and to be able to move from there. And then I think Kim did also want me to touch on some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of restarting and the rankings. Again, thinking about it from the standpoint of starting local and then slowly expanding the geography. There are options for effectively taking the ratings and using those for some type of club-based, state-based, regional ranking system, which is something that we'd like to hear some comments on, or your general feedback on. And then as we do move closer to that phase 4 of U.S. squash national tournaments, there will be a question as to qualifying into the larger tournaments. So the JCTs, the nationals, the gold tournaments, which generally do have pretty large wait lists, and there's pretty significant demand for. So how will that be managed? It could be a number of things that have been discussed over the past couple of months, at least internally. One could be the possibility of cut-free open tournaments, which is basically just what it sounds like. Everyone that signs up gets in, has a series of a number of them, the final number to be determined, but effectively using that as a way to jumpstart the rankings. We've talked about regionalizing tournaments. So effectively mini structures within each region for a number of these different levels, the silver and bronze, possibly some of the gold tournaments, and then having a regional distribution or allocation based on into the larger national tournaments, into the JCTs, into nationals. Again, none of these are final. These are just some ideas that have been thrown around in terms of how to restart the actual tournament process. But a major piece of the conversation, in my mind, has to do with what do we do now until we get there? How can we keep players engaged? What can we do to get them on court in a way that meets their needs, in a way that allows them to continue to develop? So with that, I throw it back to Kim.
I think I'd like to hear from the community. Dan, are there any some questions that have come in so far?
Yeah, we have a bunch coming in. Wanted to let everyone know in the chat we had a couple questions regarding college, and we're definitely going to spend some time addressing college squash later in the call, so thank you for those. Kim, we've had a couple questions as well regarding some of these return to play questions that we're speaking of now. So some that are related are whether there are models that you're seeing internationally that we can pull from where they've had success in this area. And also several questions coming in around any rough idea of timing of when we might be able to move to certain other phases, and whether that would need to happen all at the same time nationally, or whether different states and regions, depending on where they are, could move at different paces.
Okay, all good questions. So the first question was regarding, is there anything else out there in the world that any other governing body or federation, I think, is doing that we could use as well? And those are very good questions. Part of how we came up with the guidelines that we had was we were, first of all, part of the USOPC, the United States Olympics and Paralympic Committee. They had a bunch of webinars for NGB leaders to talk about return to play across different sports, so within the US. So we took part in those and listened to what other sports were doing, and we continue to look at what other sports are doing to help guide the path. When it comes to other countries, I was liaising with the person who was doing the WSF guidelines and the England squash guidelines. So we also liaised with some of the other NGBs, squash NGBs across the world as we developed our own. And I think everybody really is taking the same approach, starting with solo. Some people are doing what they're calling socially distant squash. I think you can see that in England right now, who've come out with a few different games that you can play. England have slightly different way of going through this process. But a lot of countries have done the similar things to what we're doing, and just increasing the number of players that can play that are in your bubble, or cohort is another word that's used, and then gradually increasing that until you get to your full club play. I don't know anywhere apart from New Zealand, I think, that has gone back to a full national play. I don't know that anywhere has really progressed that far to work out how they would restart their system. But we are looking and liaising with other people to help us. We're all in a similar position. The second question was about phasing in of tournaments, right? And whether it would be different, or whether we could time it for different places in the country. And this goes back to what Harry was saying. I think that if you're talking about a points-based system, where we go back to a points-based ranking system, that is based on national competition. And so for us to restart suddenly at the top level, at the highest level of national competition, I think we would be needing to see travel restrictions being lifted. At our highest level, JCT level, I think that is very hard to regionalize. And so we would need to make sure that people had an opportunity to play and to travel to those tournaments. So we need to see that. I think that testing will become probably a bigger thing. At the moment, it's very hard to do anything other than a temperature check and verbal testing. If we had a rapid testing and we could turn around, the turnaround time was very short, then maybe that would help us if we were going to go to a national level of competition. So we're looking at probably the same news that you are to try and work out when those things will be in place, which will allow us to do a highest level of competition. I think when it comes to again, for the points base, for the bronze and silver, we would need to see some regionality, some regions being open, and we might be able to do stuff when regions were opening. The thing that's going to happen first in my mind is the perhaps a ratings-based competition, so that could really be local. So if your club is open and ready to do tournaments, if your local guidelines allow you to do tournaments, then there's no reason why you can't. And please be my guest, go ahead and do so. If your district, within your district, and there's a club in your district that will bring in and allow non-members, and your district is subject to guidelines that allow tournaments, then yeah, we can get those going. And that's part of the conversation we have with our teaching pros, is to make sure that we can help each other with when is that the right time for your region, your county, your state. What I do know is New Hampshire is actually ready right now, but New Hampshire can do tournaments only for New Hampshire residents. But most states aren't quite ready for tournaments yet. They specifically say no tournaments, but they will allow a league play. What they don't want are people lingering, and the tournament is seen as an event where people will stay. So at the moment, when you look through all the different guidelines for the states, they wouldn't allow it. So even if you are ready and you think you're ready, if your state isn't ready, then we can't do it. So we're trawling through every week all those guidelines and talking to our teaching pros, so that when those guidelines are lifted and we have a club that allows the play, then we can start that process. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's certainly how we're looking at it right now. So, you know, yeah, as soon as those guidelines are lifted, we have somewhere, we have the protocols in place, we have people who want to play, then yeah, let's do it.
There were some questions I've received via the chat around, you know, the different types of play, and I wanted to clarify as well that, you know, return to competition obviously doesn't mean just tournaments, as Kim is indicating, and many different types of competition could be involved, and you know, a tournament is not a tournament is not a tournament as well. So different types of functions and
right.
in the way that we do it is certainly possible. And
can I just add? Sorry there to interrupt. I could you made me think a little bit more about that. When I say competition, like you say, if a club is ready to do a box league, if a club is ready to do a ladder, or if two clubs are ready to play league matches against each other, that is all competition, and that is all matches that can affect a rating. And if we did instigate some kind of ratings-based system, that would allow your junior player to have something to play for, to perhaps increase their rating. There's ways we can slice and dice that by age group, by gender, by club, by district, by region, and nationally. So there's all sorts of ways that we can help to perhaps engage kids or give them a goal through not just tournament play, but any type of play that's entered onto the system.
Kim, can you expand a little bit? We have a couple questions around tournament operations, people commenting on mass off court, mass on court, questions around whether there's specific guidance around rates of infection in specific regions that would allow us to move to different phases, a couple questions around ventilation and other club procedures that could facilitate the return to tournaments. Can you speak a little bit about the process of working with our medical advisory board over the coming months, of what you're getting from the USOPC and other guidelines to help facilitate some of the operational improvements that you mentioned earlier on the call?
Yeah. Yep, I can speak to some of those. I'm a doctor, but not a medical doctor. Fortunately, our medical advisory board does have knowledge. Some people on there do have a lot of knowledge about COVID, as I said, involved in the vaccine development even. So part of the reasons for us using the approach we did, which was solo practice, and we haven't necessarily gone with social distancing, is because there isn't, you know, once you're in a squash court, you've got two people sharing the same space. And so no matter what you do, you're sharing the same space, and it's still a risk. And what we're trying to do is to mitigate as much risk as we possibly can on the squash court. And the good news is it's 2 people per 600 and something square feet, and it's not 22 people like you have on say a soccer field. So in terms of density, it's good, but it's still shared space. I am not sure about the infection rate. I have to say that is not something that I actually know about, or people really talk about when they talk about return to youth sports or return to tournaments. Part of that, I think, will be guided as well by the state or the authority. They tend to be the ones who are at the moment saying whether it is allowed, although just because the state allows it doesn't mean that we necessarily should. So I can definitely, I'll take that one back. I have a meeting tomorrow with the medical advisory board and find out more about the level of infection per 100,000. I honestly don't know that one yet, but I promise I will take that away with me. In terms of ventilation, I agree that the ventilation is extremely important. This virus is known to be airborne and aerosolizes as well, which means it's lingering in the air. And so ventilation and airflow and air exchange becomes something that we need to make sure that we understand in every facility that has something like a tournament where you have a lot of people coming in and out. I spoke to an HVAC expert yesterday about this as well, and also waiting to see a little bit more what the government says and the CDC say about ventilation specifically. But it seems to me that most people are saying you need filters that are MERV 13, if that means anything to anybody, but those are numbers that you should be looking at. But just looking at your air exchange, making sure you bring in air from outside and that you manage, that you do get an exchange of air more than 2 per hour, I believe is what people are saying. Again, you become experts in things that didn't really know that I had to find out about, but this is all good. So we are taking advice from our autonomy experts in the ventilation world. We have got some ventilation guidelines on our website, and I want to be a little bit more specific with them so that facility owners and teaching pros know what it is that they need to do to try to make their space as safe as they possibly can. Were there any other parts of the operation protocols that came up, Dan?
Yeah, a couple additional questions around whether additional safety protocols will allow us to increase the speed of a return to tournament play, and then inclusive also of the potential for rapid testing and so on. And I think all of these, the answer is as many protocols as we can to keep people safe, and keep the people at the tournament outside of the players safe as well. Will be done. Rapid testing is certainly offering in a kind of rapidly evolving area right now. So if that is a functional possibility, and I think as was mentioned in the chat, that building that into tournament costs could be a way to get around the costs. So we're certainly looking at all of those, and I think as guidelines are put out by Kim and Harry in the coming weeks and months for more community feedback, there will be more specifics around a lot of these policies and procedures as informed by governmental advice, by our own advisory boards and committees as well. If that is an appropriate summary, Kim.
That was very good.
Kim, I think there were plenty of questions. I want to make sure we have enough time to cover it around college squash. I'll open that up if that's okay with you. And so obviously there are a bunch of moving pieces with college squash. They're on people's minds right now. There is significant concern in the community around the announcements from Brown and from Stanford about the elimination of their varsity programs from their athletic departments. And we'll address some of the efforts that we're doing in that area and the partners we're working with in a second. The other side of the coin, especially for families of high schoolers, are concerns surrounding the recruiting process and how the kind of massive disruption over the last 6 months is going to affect that. Obviously, the pandemic has had significant effects upon universities across the board, and athletics is not immune from that. And the recruiting timelines for now will remain the same. But each college in itself is handling its own recruiting processes and how they're approaching athletes in different ways. So we see our role and in working with our close partners at the College Squash Association to facilitate communication between junior families and the college coaches specifically in order to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date recruiting information, and that the college coaches specifically understand the types of play and competition that are happening on the U.S. squash side, so that they're still able to get insight, see players, see people who are improving, understand the commitment and time and effort that players have been putting in order to potentially play in college. So over the coming weeks and months, we're going to be facilitating several live conversations with families from the junior community and sets of coaches and leadership from the College Squash Association, and also doing some joint communication with them out to all of you in order to keep you abreast of the most current information and what's happening. But the baseline is that, you know, colleges are still actively planning for their programs, even if there's uncertainty around what that play will look like in college this specific season, based on what each individual institution and the leagues do. And coaches are actively and eagerly kind of looking for players as they're moving forward and to bolster their programs into the future. So I do want to also welcome Sue Venkatesan on the call, who has recently just ascended to the chairship of the board for US Squash as of July 1st, which we're really excited about. She's been a great asset to the board up to this point, and we're really excited to have her leadership over the coming years. So Sue, welcome. Thanks for joining us from the Bay Area, and I'll let you address a little bit more holistically our partnerships and the organizations we're working with around the college questions.
Thanks, Dent, and thanks to all of you. I've been reading the chat and some great ideas are coming out, so keep them coming. On the college squash front, it is very sobering. I'd like to start with providing some context. First, not everyone may know that we have an independent governing body that oversees the varsity college system, and that's the College Squash Association. Some years ago, that had been run through a volunteer network of coaches providing volunteer governance, and Kevin Clipstein really sort of saw several years ago that having an independent governing body for that would make that a stronger organization. I was a part of a task force that put that together, and so there has been a board and more formally, I think, an executive director of that work over the last year and a half. So terrific to have a strong partner to be working with. And secondly, I wanted to mention, many of you had heard the news about Georgetown adding a women's program. CSA with US Squash had been working to grow and build strength in terms of the varsity program. Also, there was going to be, and prior to the pandemic, a new varsity men's program to be added. So there has been a collaboration between US Squash and CSA to be doing this work. From a contextual piece, the sports landscape is definitely changing. The pandemic has accelerated things and the financial conditions at colleges, but even prior to that, a number of schools had been undertaking an athletics review. So to give you some context, as of last weekend, 62 D1 sports programs had been cut, and 242 overall programs across D1, T2, and 3 were also cut, of which tennis accounts for 20% of those cut programs. So what we are seeing in squash is something facing a number of sports. Obviously for us, we are a much have a smaller footprint from a collegiate varsity perspective. And so every loss we take as very sobering and significant. Behind the scenes, this is an existential issue for college squash, US squash, and the urban squash programs. So squash, the SCA, Squash and Education Alliance, the 3 organizations have been meeting regularly. We are collaborating to address this in a proactive way. I would say that our work right now is on 2 fronts. First, it's to really look at supporting the network of coaches. This is something that has taken coaches across every sport a bit by surprise, and helping to educate them, as well as looking program to program and providing specific support. Each college and university, in terms of how they're looking at this, is different. For some, financial issues are the primary motivator for change. For others, they're taking a deeper look at enhancing the competitive level and assessing where they can become more competitive across sports. For others, they're looking at diversifying the roster and so forth. So we are looking at providing support to each program based upon what we understand towards of each one's institutional goals. To do that, we are building an informal network of people. The squash community is amazing. We have incredible alumni, players. The junior community is also very actively involved in their various alma maters, and we have been pulling together people who have what I would say is not necessarily access to the coaches, because we have that, but access to athletic directors where we may feel we don't have a clear line of communication or understanding, as well as higher up administratively, and that may be at some schools, admissions departments play a larger role, the board, and so forth. So if any of you have that kind of access, please reach out to Kevin Dent, myself, or David Pullman directly, who is the executive director of CSA. Through that network, we're looking to both do two things. One is to get insight in terms of the squash program's standing and how the strength of where they sit relative to institutional goals and the shifting kind of landscape, as well as to advocate. To some degree, our sport is not as well understood at some of these schools, and to be able to correct perceptions when they don't match reality is very important, and to really highlight our assets. And from that perspective, I would say highlighting some of the excellent work that the urban squash programs do, as well as the number of athletes who have emerged from those programs who are actually on varsity rosters and contributing is very important at certain schools. And so we are seeking to do that. And then finally, what I would say that we are doing in a very proactive way is developing communications and advocacy for our sport. You may have read articles in the paper that have cast a number of sports in a certain way. We're sort of being lumped into, along with others, in some ways, as not necessarily being diverse or inclusive. And we'd like to make sure that we are being proactive in terms of highlighting kind of, our assets, which is the gender parity piece of squash, the international diversity, and the diversity actually that are growing. So we're growing rapidly, and not many people understand that growth, and showcasing the diversity that comes from that, as well as our urban squash network. So that is a piece. We've had some success. I think there was an excellent op-ed that was placed in USA Today that spoke to what we believe is a very poor decision at Stanford, and we will continue to do that. So this is going to be not just what I would call a short-term effort, but one in which we will invest in going together and working with partners and actually the community and alumni base to strengthen our positioning here.
Thanks, Sue. Appreciate you jumping on. One logistical note, we're getting a ton of great comments, both individually and to the full group on the group chat. We are capturing all of these, so please know that for any items we may not address directly or feedback that's being given, we're making sure to aggregate that. And I encourage all of you on many of these topics that you have more in-depth feelings on to send those to us via email so that we can make sure to aggregate the community thoughts. My email is kim.clearkin@ussquash.com. And
Thanks, Ben.
we have a couple additional questions around ratings and rankings. Kim, can you speak a little bit to kind of where we are now and then the transition of as play does come back, what that may look like and what our current thinking is around that transition on the rankings?
Yes, of course. I think it's important for people to know that we're talking about ratings, we're talking about rankings. The points-based ranking that everybody knows, as we said at the beginning, that is frozen, and I don't see that really coming back until we have a national point structure. But I don't think that means that we can't have some kind of ranking system that would be an interim system that would take perhaps they take the players to run in parallel with that points-based system. And then when we're ready to come back to the point system, then we effectively will restart those rankings. And so when we talk about ratings, we're talking about something that we can use in the interim to judge the level of play of people during this interim period. And I think I saw something on the chat where someone was talking about, well, you know, is the rating in the different regions, is it equivalent? Would you perhaps weight the ratings? And I think, you know, we are reviewing the ratings right now and making sure that they are accurate, and that they are accurate not only within the US, but with other countries as well. And so the ratings that we would be using would be as accurate as they can be across everywhere in the country. And so we would, therefore weighting is not something that we would need to do. They would be an accurate reflection, as accurate as we can have, of the playing level of people across the country. If you're a 4.0 on the West Coast, you're a 4.0 on the East Coast. And one of the beauties of perhaps having a rating system is that we can start to mix things up. So where you know, in a small region, if we just took, I would have to take, say, just Connecticut, not the whole East Coast, but just Connecticut, or just the Bay Area, or just, you know, Philadelphia as part of Pennsylvania, then we may not have enough players for there to be a meaningful age group play. But we could still do a meaningful skill-based play, a skilled rating-based play. You might find that if you had a 4.0 division or a 5.0 division, you're not going to get the same age group playing. You're going to get different age groups, different genders even, if that's what we want to do. And they're all playing together, and then you start mixing it up, which will just make the rating system even more accurate. Because with the rating system, the more diversity you get, then the more accurate it is as you look across at different genders, ages. And so that 4.0 is the same wherever you are, and even in the world, and that's what we're aspiring to get to with PubLocker 2. So in terms of restarting points-based ranking, we would need to see those national junior tournaments. And we have ways that Harry explained earlier of doing that. But in the interim, I feel like we can use those ratings, we can create some kind of ranking system based on those, which will, again, which we can do through tournaments or leagues, like I said earlier. And then if we can, and although you may not play in an age group in a ratings-based system, you can still be ranked in an age group in a ratings-based system. And that could also be used to even seed the restart of the point system, so that when we're ready and we're looking at what is the current playing level, because, you know, it might not be until the next calendar year that we can do the bigger tournaments, the national tournaments. So basing seeding, say, off what's happened back in March may not be the, you know, accurate reflection of players' ability. We all know how quickly the kids grow and how quickly they develop. So, you know, a 12-year-old in March is not necessarily the same player as a 13-year-old in January. So, you know, ratings does give us the opportunity that maybe not everyone has, to still see what the current playing level of the junior players are, which might help us seed the start back to a points-based system. Harry, would you have anything to add to that?
There also seems to be just a couple comments coming in on the effectively, why are the rankings frozen? Why aren't the age ups occurring at the moment? And I think Kim did touch on this a little bit, but effectively, there are no rankings right now. There's no competition, which means there are no rankings. So the rankings that are displayed are a snapshot in time from, I believe, March 12th. And the overall ranking structure is dependent on continuous competition, the ability to, for tournaments, not only to drop off of a player's profile, but for the ability for players to replace those, have an opportunity to impact their ranking. And in the absence of any level of competition, we're approaching the 5th month of this now. Again, there is no current ranking right now. There's just a snapshot in time. But yeah, I mean, to what Kim was just talking about, we do see a lot of opportunity to be able to leverage the ratings in this in this unnormal situation that we're in right now. We know people want to get back playing. We know people are very interested in resuming competition, in resuming some level of rankings, and we need to use what we have at the moment. And the ratings, we made an initial adjustment a few, maybe 5 years ago now, and the level of accuracy comparing players across different regions increased significantly. And although there may be slight variances from region to region, it is fairly accurate. A 4.0 in New York is a 4.0 in Ohio, is a 4.0 in San Francisco. And those discrepancies generally may pan out a little bit more with the points-based system, but to be able to use ratings in the interim, again, not as a long-term solution, but as a momentary option for us based in the situation we found ourselves in, to allow some level of competition and have the results from those competitions be reflected in some form of ranking, either at the club level, the state level, the regional level. I do think it's definitely worth exploring, and something that we're excited to engage the community on and work with club pros to help build that out.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for that. And I would just want to reiterate as well, I think we've had a few questions from people whose child has aged up during this time. And so they haven't had the opportunity to get to the highest ranking that they were hoping to get to. So I know many of you plan out your season, you plan out your tournaments to try to give your kids the opportunity to get as high as they can. And so, for instance, if you have been a top 10 player in the under 11 age group, under 13 age group, and then the highest ranking you achieve says 30 or 40 in this age group, and that's on your record, then people are a little concerned because it's not a true reflection of what they may have achieved. And so that is something that we'll go back to our team and trying to make sure that at least there's some kind of asterisk for this year saying like this was a COVID season, but you didn't have that opportunity, and not to judge your ability based upon that number, or maybe we just don't have that on your record. But I know that is of concern to some parents, and I've had that conversation a few times. So we understand that and accept that as a reason of concern. Are there any other questions then?
I think we have some in a couple different areas around procedures. One thing I want to note, there have been multiple questions around the masks and face shields and other PPE regarding squash, and that is stuff we're actively working with and are going to be having additional discussions with the medical advisory board or medical advisory committee over the coming weeks, Kim, I know. So those are actively in discussion and evaluation. So you'll see more information as a community on elements of that. And I think there are obviously other questions around more specifics around how more ratings-based competition would work in tournaments. And I think addressing those more holistically and recommendations that come out next will certainly happen.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think part of tonight is just to hear your concerns around that, hear the questions that you have. And as we really come to finish this call, it's now just been over an hour, so thank you for your patience on this. But if you have any more questions or any more concerns around the rating system or anything that we've spoken about tonight, please feel free to reach out to me or Harry directly. Happy to take a call or to take an email and to have that conversation with you separately. But what Harry and I will do now is we'll take this information and we'll put it together to try to create a cohesive strategy for how we move forward. What we really want to do then is to put that back to you and come back to you in 2 to 3 weeks' time and say, this is what we're thinking with more specific detail for how this will work. So it's great to have your comments, because that will make sure that we try to address each of these concerns and try to make sure that we've thought about it from every angle when we present it to you in a few weeks' time. So it's great. I wish I could have all your videos up, because I definitely miss seeing you all at the tournaments. You know, at the beginning it was kind of nice because I hadn't been at home so much for ever since I moved to the East Coast, I think. But you know, 5 months is enough. I would really enjoy seeing you again. I'm really looking forward to that. And if the only thing we can do right now is Zoom, then I'll take it. So please come back in 2 to 3 weeks' time and look out for the email for when we're going to review some of the recommendations Harry and I will come up with. And until that time, like, stay safe. Hope you can get on court and keep working hard, and we'll be back on court before you know it. But thanks for everybody for coming tonight.